Imagine finding a document, right? Once top secret, mid-70s, signed by Henry Kissinger. And it's talking about this huge global challenge, not nukes, something else, a threat greater than nuclear war. Welcome to the deep dive. We take source material, your source material, and really dig into it. Today is a fascinating one. National Security Study Memorandum 200, NSSM 200 for short. The title, Implications of Worldwide Population Growth for U.S. Security and Overseas Interests. So our mission today is to unpack this foundational one secret report. We want to pull out its core arguments, its, well, surprisingly direct findings, and some pretty controversial policy ideas it put forward. We'll look at how this seemingly academic study became this high-stakes government directive, really shaping how people thought about global development and stability. Okay, let's get into it. So NSM 200 kicks off in April 74. Kissinger signs this directive for President Nixon. What exactly was the president asking for here?
Yeah, what's really interesting is just how wide the mandate was. The president basically directed a big study looking at world population growth and how it impacts U.S. security, U.S. interests overseas, looking out to the year 2000, at least.
Okay.
And crucially, it wasn't just about, say, ecology or social stuff. The main focus, international political and economic implications. That was key.
Right, the hard power stuff.
Exactly, and they wanted it fast. A preliminary report by end of May 74. The full thing actually went to President Ford later that December, and it stayed classified, until 1989.
So a long time under wraps, and like you said, it wasn't just about trees and clean air. It was hard-nosed U.S. interests. But there was also this specific instruction in the directive from Nixon, wasn't there?
Yes, that's right.
Something about population policy being a human concern tied to individual dignity. The U.S. should work with others, not impose its views. That feels like an important nuance, maybe.
It does, and it's a really perceptive point. The report itself, well, it doesn't spell out Nixon's exact thinking behind that phrase, but it definitely shows they knew they were wading into really sensitive territory, cultural values, personal choices.
Sure.
So it suggests this desire, at least on paper, for collaboration, kind of setting a tone for how the U.S. wanted to approach this thing. It's sought as a massive shared global problem.
Okay, so the directive goes out, the study gets underway, and reading the summary, the main report, wow, it paints a pretty stark picture of the trends they were seeing. Where did they even start with the scale of the problem?
Well, connecting it to the bigger picture, the report basically found that population growth after World War II was just different. Quantitatively and qualitatively different, I think was the phrase.
How?
The rate, it was nearing 2% a year globally. That doubles the world's population in only 35 years. Compare that to maybe 1% before the war. A huge acceleration.
Okay, wow.
They pointed out almost 80 million people were being added each year. Back in 1900, it was more like 10 million a year. So just a massive jump in scale.
That's staggering. And then, as if those sheer numbers weren't enough, they flagged something else. This sharp differentiation between rich and poor countries. What do they mean, and why did that distinction matter so much to them?
Absolutely crucial point. Since about 1950, they noted richer industrialized countries. Their populations grew pretty slowly, maybe 0 to 1.5% a year.
Okay.
But in developing countries, the report calls them LDCs, less developed countries, growth rates were way higher, like 2.0 to 3.5%,
Right.
which means their populations were doubling in just 20 to 35 years. And the projections they made were, well, really eye-opening.
Like what?
The U.S. medium estimate put world population at 6.4 billion by 2000 and potentially hitting 12 billion by 2075. Think about what that meant regionally. A 5-fold increase projected for South and Southeast Asia, Latin America, and a 7-fold increase for Africa. 7-fold. Goodness. So the numbers are exploding, but it's happening fastest in the places the report itself says are least equipped to cope.
Precisely.
Which leads right into their concerns about food, right? What did they see coming on that front?
Indeed. Yeah, the report foresaw, and I quote, serious problems in food distribution and financing, making shortages likely even at the already poor nutrition levels of the time in many of those big populous LDC regions.
So not just future famine, but current issues getting worse.
Exactly. It stated pretty bluntly, actually, that 10 to 20 million people were already dying each year from malnutrition, and it warned about massive famines down the line, especially in the poorest areas if major crop failures happen. And they stressed that more food would have to come mainly from higher yields on existing land because the easy land grabs and fertilizer boosts. Those were already mostly tapped out. It implied a real shift was needed. Okay, so food is a massive concern. What about other resources? Oil, minerals, that sort of thing. did they see population growth straining those supplies in the same way? Or was there a distinction?
That's a key distinction they made. NSSM 200 argued that rapid population growth itself wasn't the main driver putting pressure on, say, depletable resources like fossil fuels or metals.
Oh, interesting. Why not?
Because demand for those things depends more on industrial output, on consumption levels.
Right, how much stuff we use.
Exactly. However, and this is the crucial caveat, they did warn that if rapid population growth held back economic development in the LDCs, then it could undermine the ability to produce and supply those very resources that the industrialized world was increasingly relying on. So it's an indirect link, but potentially a really profound one.
Got it. So it's not population directly using up the oil, but population potentially disrupting the systems that get the oil out and flowing.
You've got it.
Which brings us right to the economic impact. How did they see rapid population growth acting as this drag on development?
Well, they saw it creating a severe drag, sometimes even preventing any rise in per capita income. The report listed several factors.
Like?
Reduced family savings, for one. Less money available for investment, then needing more foreign currency just to import food, worsening unemployment and underemployment.
Makes sense.
And also huge amounts of money getting diverted to just basic services supporting dependents, schools, basic health care, instead of going into more productive investments that actually drive growth.
Right, keeping people alive versus investing in the future.
Sort of. They gave an example. Even if a country's overall economy, its GNP, grew by 5%, if its population grew by 2.5%.
Half of it is wiped out in per capita terms.
Exactly. The per capita growth is only 2.5%. And in many places, it was even less. It really paints a picture of running hard just to stand still economically.
But for me, the really striking part, maybe the most alarming part of the report, isn't just the numbers or the economics. It's the focus on the political consequences, the instability. How specific did they get?
Oh, they got quite specific. This really takes us to a core part of their argument. They basically said that the population dynamics happening in developing countries, rapid growth, people moving from the country to cities, lots of young people, slow progress, packed urban areas.
Yeah.
All that was damaging to the internal stability and international relations of countries the U.S. actually had an interest in seeing succeed.
Damaging hell.
They explicitly warned of a major risk of severe damage to world economic, political, and ecological systems, and that as those systems start failing, it would damage, quote, our humanitarian values. It wasn't abstract theory, it was a direct warning.
And you mentioned it listed concrete impacts. That list, when I read it, it felt eerily familiar, like things we still see in headlines. What kinds of scenarios were they mapping out?
They really were. The report talked about governments being overloaded by people moving into, as they put it, overswollen cities, basically cities that couldn't cope.
Right. Slums, essentially.
Yes. And they warned this could lead urban slum dwellers to become a volatile, violent force which threatens political stability.
Okay.
And then they connected those conditions to this grim list. Child abandonment, juvenile delinquency, chronic and growing underemployment and unemployment, petty thievery, organized brigandry, food riots, separatist movements, communal massacres, revolutionary actions, and counter-revolutionary coups.
Wow, that's quite a list.
It is. And importantly, the report flat out said, conflicts that are regarded in primarily political terms often have demographic roots. They didn't just say it, they gave examples.
Like ones?
Things like the El Salvador-Honduras soccer war, the Nigerian civil war, the whole conflict surrounding Bangladesh's creation involving Pakistan and India. They drew direct lines from demography to conflict.
So the conclusion inside the government was pretty stark then. A current danger of the highest magnitude calling for urgent measures.
That really does reframe things, doesn't it? It shifts the focus, at least partly, from just Cold War ideology to these underlying population pressures. Absolutely. It's almost like an early look at the kind of things we talk about now with climate migration or resource conflicts. Themes that feel very 21st century, but here they are, laid out in the 70s.
And that line about how these problems couldn't be evaded anymore by, finding new land or conquering territory or mass immigration.
Yeah, that line is powerful. It suggests they felt the world had hit some kind of limit, a new phase where the old safety valves were gone, a really stark assessment.
Okay, so given this bleak picture, famine, instability, economic drag, what did the report actually propose? What were the general goals and requirements they laid out? What was the big question they were trying to answer with policy?
Well, the central question was framed almost like this big choice for humanity. Are we going to stay on this path leading to maybe 12, 15 billion people? Or can we switch tracks, get to earliest feasible population stability, which they thought meant maybe 8 or 9 billion total?
And the stakes were?
The stakes were presented as the difference between, on the one hand, bare survival maybe, or these enormous tragedies of malnutrition and starvation, versus, on the other hand, making perceptible material gain and easing chronic problems. So, yeah, pretty high-stakes framing.
And they didn't just frame the question, they set a target, a very specific, very ambitious goal.
They really did. They admitted, there's no single magic bullet here, but the report recommended that, quote, our aim should be for the world to achieve a replacement level of fertility, a two-child family on the average, by about the year 2000.
2 kids per family, globally, by 2000. Wow.
Yeah. To get there, they calculated the growth rate, which was then around 2%, would need to drop to 1.7% within a decade, and then down to 1.1% by the year 2000. That translates to significantly fewer people in the long run. Hugely ambitious for a global effort starting in the mid-70s.
Hugely. So how did they propose actually doing that? They stressed U.S. leadership was essential, but also that the LDCs themselves had to lead. What was the actual strategy?
It was definitely multi-pronged. First, they said concentrate on key countries. They identified 13 nations, India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Mexico, Brazil, places like that, which together at that time accounted for nearly half, 47% of the world's population increase.
Focus the resources.
Right.
Makes sense.
Right. Second, ramp up assistance for family planning, services, information, technology. The goal was to get information and materials fully available to the vast majority, like 85% of people in those key countries who weren't being reached yet, especially the rural poor. And they wanted this done by 1980.
Right.
And that included pushing for more research into better contraception methods that were, simple, low-cost, effective, safe, long-lasting, and acceptable.
So direct family planning support was key. But what about the underlying conditions? Did they talk about creating an environment where people might choose smaller families?
Yes, absolutely. That's where they recommended what they called selective development policies. Basically, prioritizing specific areas of development believed to influence fertility choices.
Such as?
Things like providing basic education, especially for women. Reducing infant mortality rates through low-cost healthcare, because if parents expect more children to survive, they might have fewer.
Right.
Expanding job opportunities, again, particularly for women. Finding alternatives to having many children as a form of old age security.
The social safety net idea.
Exactly. And boosting incomes for the poorest people, especially in rural areas. They even mentioned providing privately owned farms as a potential factor.
Interesting.
And they explicitly said education about smaller families, promoting this two-child family ideal, should start right down in elementary schools.
Okay, so it's a mix of direct intervention and trying to shape the socioeconomic environment. Now, the report also waded into some really, really sensitive areas. There was something about an alternate view and a remarkably direct comment on abortion.
Yes, this is where the document gets particularly provocative, you could say. It includes this alternate view, apparently from some experts involved, who felt the situation was actually more serious than the main report suggested.
More serious how?
They thought voluntary measures might not be enough, that maybe even stronger measures could be needed. And this would mean tackling, quote, fundamental, very difficult moral issues.
Like what kind of issues?
Things like U.S. consumption patterns should wealthy nations consume less, or maybe mandatory population programs, or even tightly controlling food resources as leverage.
Yeah.
Really difficult stuff.
Wow. Okay. And the abortion point?
Yeah, there's a specific section on abortion, and it states, incredibly directly for a government paper, no country has reduced its population growth without resorting to abortion. Full stop.
That's blunt.
It goes on to say that abortion, legal and illegal, now has become the most widespread fertility control method in use in the world today. And based on that, it argued it would be unwise to restrict abortion research.
Just remarkable frankness for an official U.S. government document in the mid-70s.
Absolutely.
And alongside these sort of harder-edged points, there was also a note of caution, wasn't there, about how the U.S. should frame its involvement.
Precisely. A very important point for them. The report really emphasized the need to, quote, take care that our activities should not give the appearance to the LDCs of an industrialized country policy directed against the LDCs.
Avoid looking like demographic imperialism.
Essentially, yes. They stressed that leaders in the third world, as they termed it then, should be seen to be in the forefront and obtain the credit for successful programs.
Let them own it.
Right. And the U.S. message should focus on the right of individuals and couples to choose their family size. But at the same time, assert that parenthood comes with responsibilities to children, to the community, and that nations also need to think about, the welfare of their neighbors and the world. So a delicate balancing act, leadership, but trying not to look like they were dictating.
What a fascinating document. A real deep dive into something that was top secret for so long, NSSM 200. It gives you this incredible window into how U.S. foreign policy started thinking about threats that weren't just military tanks and missiles.
Yeah, grappling with these perceived existential risks beyond the traditional.
And that explicit goal, the two-child family, averaged by 2000, plus those stark warnings about famine and political breakdown. It's really quite something to read today.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? When we face these huge global challenges today, population dynamics are still relevant, sure, but also climate change, resource scarcity, pandemics. How much do we as a global community need to consider policies that are ambitious, maybe even feel intrusive, and definitely raise complex moral questions? That alternate view in the report, hinting at stronger measures addressing consumption, those weren't the main recommendations, but they were there.
Right. The road not taken, perhaps. So looking back now, decades later, at how demographics, resources, and geopolitics all intersect, what does the legacy of NSSM 200 tell us, maybe, about the kind of difficult choices and trade-offs societies might face when confronting these massive systemic global risks? Definitely gives you something to chew on as you look at today's world.